The Energy Room dives into the dynamic world of energy infrastructure. Hosted by Maurice Kinyalimwea, a visionary politician engineer shaping the future of our fragile, expensive electric grid. In each episode, Maurice brings together the brightest minds and passionate innovators who are building resilient energy systems that power our lives. Tune in to discover what it takes to engineer tomorrow's energy systems. Whether you're an industry leader, a curious guest, or a subscriber eager to stay ahead in the ever-evolving global energy landscape, welcome to the Energy Room.
In this inaugural episode, we will discuss why the United States of America is rethinking nuclear power for our homes, key industries, and advanced technologies like artificial intelligence. It is estimated that 85 to 90 gigawatts of new capacity will be needed by 2030 for data centers just in the United States. That equates to an astonishing 47 to 90 new nuclear reactors in the United States. Today, I'm going to talk with Elizabeth Muller, the founder and CEO of Deep Fission, and how Deep Fission is rethinking America's nuclear power renaissance. And also, why building a nuclear reactor 1 mile under the surface of the Earth is cheaper than you may think. Welcome to the Energy Room. Welcome, Liz Muller, to the Energy Room podcast.
Thank you,
Hi,
Maurice.
Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm glad that you're here with us on the Energy Room. Can you briefly introduce yourself for our guest, Liz?
Sure. So, Liz Muller, I am currently the co founder and CEO of Deep Fission. But before Deep Fission, I was also the CEO and co founder of Deep Isolation, a nuclear waste disposal company. And then before that, I was running a nonprofit. I had experience doing consulting at the OECD for a while, and I grew up in Berkeley, California.
Oh, interesting. So let's start, Liz. Why did you found Deep Fission?
So deep fission is putting nuclear power, small modular reactors, a mile underground. And the reason that we're doing that is I think one of the big challenges that the nuclear industry has been facing is that of cost. Nuclear is still too expensive. And we had an exciting realization as part of the work we were doing at Deep Isolation, doing nuclear waste disposal in boreholes a mile underground, when we
Okay.
recognized that in a borehole a mile underground, you actually have the conditions that you want for nuclear power, for pressurized water reactors to operate without the construction cost. So, why do you have so much construction? Construction is the most expensive part of nuclear power. It's for containment, it's for pressure, and it's for emergency cooling systems. All of those things you have just as a feature of being in a borehole a mile underground.
So what you're telling us here today is that actually placing a nuclear reactor a mile underground costs less than building one a mile above where you want to build it. So basically on the surface of the Earth.
Yes, that's right. That was the big surprise and the exciting discovery that we made because it's the construction cost of nuclear power that is the expensive part. And so if you go into a borehole a mile underground, you still need to drill the hole, but we know how to do that using existing drilling technologies. That's fairly straightforward. And then you can get rid of all of the expensive parts of nuclear power.
Very interesting. I think that's amazing that you're leveraging a technology from another industry, which is similar related. It's still in the energy industry, right?
Yeah.
But you're leveraging a technology from oil and gas for something that is going to help with climate change and decarbonize our energy systems while providing reliable power. So it seems, Liz, like Deep Fission is checking all these boxes. I mean, is that true?
I think so. I think it's one of the reasons that this is so exciting. And you're right that there isn't enough crossover between oil and gas and nuclear technology. But I think what that means is that there is room for new breakthroughs and really exciting developments in the nuclear industry that can make a very significant difference to the way we approach nuclear going forward.
Yeah, I really think that's where we need to head, Liz. Can you please briefly talk about your time at Berkeley Earth? So, how does your work today help achieve what you were seeking to achieve and the objectives that you achieved at Berkeley Earth?
Yeah, great question. Berkeley Earth, we founded. So I founded that with my father, who's also been the co-founder for Deep Isolation and now Deep Fission. And I think the interest was I was concerned about climate change, and my father wasn't convinced that it was real. And so we recognized that there was a need for a impartial non-government entity to go in and to look at the data and to see what does the data say. This was around the time of ClimateGate and sort of all of the questions that people were asking about is the government really being completely transparent when it comes to climate data. Um, what I learned, so first of all, we showed that global warming is real and it's human caused.
Yeah, right.
But I think what I also learned, have since learned, is that nonprofits are great and they absolutely can serve a purpose that can't be achieved sometimes by either for profit companies or also by the government. But in terms of my personal interest, I think I've since learned that I really like doing things. Writing reports, doing analysis, all that stuff is fun too. But if you really want to change the world, I think the best way to do that is to create a company that can go out and do something that you wouldn't be able to do if you were just on your own.
Liz, I wholeheartedly agree with you. As an entrepreneur myself, um, it's amazing when you build something and how people react to it versus writing something and saying
Yes.
something. The first question they
Yes.
ask is, "Well, what have you built?" Right? And you have to say, "Well, this is what I've built."
Yeah.
And so, thank you for being a builder, right? And leading an industry that's in, I would like to say, a renaissance.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get your feedback on this. Um, the U.S. has 92 nuclear reactors throughout 28 states, the largest fleet in the world, actually. Illinois has the largest concentration at 14. Missouri has one. So, with companies like Deep Fission, the work that you're doing, Liz, and your colleagues in this nuclear industry that's burgeoning, this advanced nuclear industry that's burgeoning, how can the U.S. keep its lead, not just in terms of the amount of reactors that are in operation, but really keep a technological lead and a thought leadership lead in the nuclear energy industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we have 92 reactors today, but most of them are pretty old. We have not been building new nuclear. Other than the Vogel plant, there's just not a lot of new nuclear that has been coming online. And I think if we want to keep that leadership position, which I think we do and we should, then we need to figure out how to build more and how to build better. There's been a lot of interest in doing this, but the costs have been too high. So the cost for Vogel were higher than they should have been, higher than they were expected to be. I think there is an interest in potentially building more of large nuclear power plants. And keeping the costs down is going to continue, I think, to be a challenge. At the same time, we're seeing advanced reactor technologies that are looking at potentially being able to bring the cost down, but maybe not right away. Maybe it's going to take them a certain number of years or a number of iterations, a number of implementations in order to become cost effective, which is a different type of challenge. And I think the reason I'm so excited about deep fission is we are looking at being economical, profitable, cost effective from the very first implementation. And I think that really
Okay.
can be a game changer when it comes to the interest in building new nuclear power.
Wow, Liz. So you're really thinking of this from a really truly a fiscally responsible manner, which is sometimes not what you hear when it comes to nuclear, right? We just have to build it because we need a lot more power, or a lot of the existing reactors are, they have come up for relicensure, or they may not be able to be relicensed, or there are policy reasons for them to be shut down prematurely, unfortunately. So it's really interesting to see that how you're thinking about the cost benefit, which is always what a startup should be thinking about, versus we have to do this at all costs. So thank you for that. Another question I have for you is that there are 80,000 metric tons of spent fuel at 75 sites in 35 states. How much energy is used up from the fuel rods that are sitting either in the cooling pools or at on-site storage facilities? How much is used, and how much energy is still in those rods?
Yeah, it's a great question, Maurice. I think the answer is really it depends on, again, coming back to the economics and the cost of recycling and reusing the spent fuel versus mining new uranium. I think it's pretty clear that if any recycling is going to happen, the real value is in the newer fuel, not the old fuel that's been out there for a very long time. So we are continuing to generate new waste every year, and that is probably going to be the waste that is most valuable for those who want to think about future recycling. I don't expect a lot of value to be in the existing waste that is, like you said, mostly in pools and in dry casks around the country. I think the best thing for that existing inventory is going to be to put the waste into disposal.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective because you hear a lot about we can reuse old waste, we can, um, I don't know, somehow refine that into new fuel that can be utilized. But you're saying that the cost effectiveness of that is going to be very challenging for the foreseeable future. Is that because of technological advances, or it's just cheaper to produce, uranium concentrate from mined uranium?
Yeah, I mean, to be completely clear, I think there is benefit in some recycling and reprocessing of the newer waste. So that's what many countries around the world do. They recycle, reprocess as soon as the waste comes out of the reactor, or soon after their waste comes out of the reactor. But once it's been stored for 20, 40, 60 years, the value of recycling and reusing that waste goes down. So even if
Okay.
recycling does happen going forward, we're still producing lots of new waste. So it's not clear that the 80,000 tons of spent fuel that have been sitting there, that are not maybe the ideal use for the recycling reprocessing going forward. I think they probably will need a waste disposal solution. And to be clear, even when you reprocess the waste, you still do have other waste. So you can't get around the issue of needing waste disposal. It's really just a source of additional uranium, but plutonium, other fuel sources potentially, but you still have waste that needs disposal.
Okay, thank you for parsing that out. So basically you're saying that, you know, when you're refueling, that's the time to do it because certainly it's obviously fresh. It hasn't gotten to I'm guessing, a half-life where the half life starts to increase and your your fuel starts to degrade. But the important part that I heard from you, Liz, is that some of it can be fed back into the supply chain versus it actually truly being its own supply chain. So we will still need to mine uranium. In the future, we will just be able to take some of the fresh fuel that's being taken out and new fuel that's being put into the core, that some of that fuel will be able to be put back into the supply chain, but there will be some waste. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, excellent, excellent. You know, the reason I asked that question, I was reading earlier this week about Constellation and the Meta deal and the Trump administration deal.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things that was talked about was that currently the nation's demand for uranium concentrate is around 45 million pounds. And to meet the demand in with the nuclear that we want to build, such as deep fission and your colleagues and other companies, of course, that would drive that demand up to about 180 million pounds per year. The challenge we're going to have, it seems, Liz, today, the whole world only mines about 165 million pounds. So, how in the world can one country over, overutilize the existing world supply when other countries beyond the US, United States, are going to want to use that same supply? So how do we not have a choke point in the supply chain to build advanced nuclear power?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the existing supply, there's lots of uranium out there. There are lots of uranium deposits. There's even uranium that you can get from seawater. So I don't have any concerns about the total amount of uranium that we will be able to get. The challenge has been that some of those sources of uranium are uneconomical if there are competitors who come in and price the fuel very, very low in order to get rid of the competition. So, the challenge that we're facing with uranium production is really one that is more of market dynamics. And is
Okay.
there a guaranteed customer for the fuel at a given price? Those, I think, are issues that can be solved. I think we have seen in the past that with the Russians providing so much of the supply of uranium, it just didn't make sense for the U.S. Economically to get into the uranium market, but that has
Yeah.
changed. And so we're seeing now, we are seeing a lot of interest in uranium mining, in uranium production. I think it will catch up. We will start producing significantly more uranium than we are right now, but there will be a delay. That will take a little while in order to get that supply chain up and running.
Liz, you just talking about the uranium supply chain, and I'm glad you talked about seawater, which is true that I think many people don't know, but I'm glad they're going to know it from this conversation that we're having today. I would like to say that you really put a new idea on the table here. It seems that as we think about the rare earths conversation in terms of rare earths mining, processing, manufacturing of end products such as magnets and other things that utilize rare earths, we need to think about the same. We need to have that same context when it comes to uranium, because if we can't secure the uranium supply that we need to build the reactors, such as the ones that Deficient plans to build, then we're not going to have that supply chain to be able to do that domestically, much less globally. So, um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I was very happy to see one of the executive orders that the administration put out I guess 2 weeks ago now, was focused on the uranium supply chain. So I do think that we are taking some of the right steps, some of the steps that we need to get this stabilized and to make sure that we have sufficient uranium. A second issue, which we haven't even touched on yet,
Mm.
but I think is important as well, is the enrichment of the uranium. So it's not enough to mine the uranium; you then have to enrich it. And while nuclear reactor technology today uses 5% or less enriched uranium, many advanced reactor technologies need a much higher level of enrichment, up to 19.75%. That is also not available today.
Oh, so they need new reactor technologies need about 5 to 7% enrichment?
So some of them will, so 5 to 7% is what existing reactors today are potentially
Okay.
going to be switching over to in
Okay.
order to get more out of the current reactors. So I think that is a great additional enrichment that will be helpful to them. But many of the advanced reactors, and deep fission is different, so this is not in the same category, but many of the advanced reactors need more than 5 to 7%. They're needing 19% or a much higher enrichment level. And the supply chain for that is much harder to get than for the 5 to 7% enrichment.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that it was that high, upwards of 19%, for some advanced reactor technologies that they need an enrichment at that level. That almost gets into and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems to probably get into a defense type of enrichment. I'm thinking, a nuclear powered submarine. They don't refuel every 18 months for sure because I mean they can't. So I would know for sure that at least their enrichment levels are higher. And so that lends me to believe that there's certainly going to be some regulatory issues concerning that, right? For civilian nuclear. Does that seem right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the HALEU fuel, which is the fuel that many advanced reactors are going to need, is typically a range from 10% up to 19.75%. So it has to be under 20%,
Mm.
or it's not going to be considered acceptable under existing regulations. So there is some there's a lot of work being done to supply HALEU fuel, but it's not yet available, and there isn't yet a robust supply chain to get it accessible.
To accomplish that. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Liz. Now, I have another statistic here, which is really interesting, and this gets into the capacity factor of nuclear power. And I just took some information about actually two reactors that are around the country. There's Calvert Cliffs one by Constellation. It has a capacity factor of 101.34, which I guess that means they don't need to refuel, but I mean that's a really high capacity factor, right? Or they refuel very quickly, obviously. And then there's Waterford 3 by Entergy that has a capacity factor of 71.56. Callaway by Amber, Missouri has a capacity factor of 88.56 with a 22.45% change from 2019 to 2021 to 2022 to 2024. So basically from one refuel to the other. What fuel source today can even come close to nuclear power? And I mean, seriously, can anything else come close? And where does deep fission, where does deep fission believe that they will be in terms of your capacity factor?
Yeah, it's a great question. And capacity factors are a little bit complicated, which is why you see the 101%, right? Of course, that's nonsensical. You can't have something that's functioning more than 100% of the time.
Exactly.
So it's a little bit complicated, but you are right that nuclear power is extremely reliable, and that is one of the reasons that we need so much of it. When we're looking about the future of AI and data centers and the amount of electricity that we're expecting to need over the coming years, it's gonna be a large amount, and it needs to be reliable and stable and cost effective. And that's really the challenge that we're facing. I think, natural gas and coal are other alternatives. But if you want something that's clean, and many people do, then that is nuclear power, and we really, are gonna need a lot more of it in the coming years.
I agree, Liz. We're going to need so much nuclear power. As I was telling you earlier, one of my mentors, who was a former director of nuclear development at an investor-owned utility here in the Midwest, he convinced me that it all goes back to nuclear. At the end of the day, it all goes back to nuclear power, for the power that we need to power our lives, power our factories, power our transportation, our processes to develop chemicals and other things. It all goes back to nuclear because it's just so rich in terms of the amount of energy it can provide, in terms of its footprint, that it just can't be beat. I mean, nothing has a capacity factor nowhere near 71, 71, or 80, or 90, which is actually the average, right?
Yeah.
For reactors around the country. Nothing comes that close. The only thing that comes close is natural gas, and that has its own challenges in terms of you know access to existing pipelines, right?
Yeah.
Because natural gas is also utilized for heating,
That's right.
so you're going to have people you know in houses that don't have access to natural gas for heating in Lansing, Michigan. I don't think so, right? I mean, am I wrong here, Liz?
No, I think that's correct, and we've definitely seen that when it gets really cold, houses, I think quite rightly, have priority for heating, for access to the natural gas. I think what's so exciting about nuclear is everything that you've said. It's the densest fuel source. I think it's the most reliable, the most stable, the most secure form of electricity that there is, and it doesn't compete with houses for heating or for other uses. The challenge that I think is the one that we're about to see start to change is that historically nuclear has been more expensive. And so historically it's been a trade-off. Do you need is nuclear worth the additional cost you have to pay for it? And as I think we're about to start to see nuclear power that is the same cost or maybe even cheaper than natural gas and coal, I think that's going to be a very exciting shift in the way that the world thinks about nuclear power.
I think so too, Liz. And I would really be remiss if I don't thank you for joining us here today. Um, this conversation is so good that I think we can, make this a part one and then have a part two. But before that, let me ask you this last question. Tell me about a time in your childhood that has impacted you in a positive way. How did that moment shape the way that you approach deep fission's trajectory?
Mm, great question. Um, I'll share an example that is maybe not what you were expecting, but I think a
Okay.
very positive moment in my life, which is I think I was in seventh grade, and my teacher had us do a weekly assignment in which we had to summarize a news article. And it could be any news article. It was just check or no check. There was pass and fail. You didn't get a letter grade. You just had to summarize any news article,
Okay.
and bring it in every week. And what I discovered is that I could skim the newspaper and pick out the very shortest news article that was there and summarize it very quickly. It didn't take a lot of effort. And so I just picked the shortest news article. I didn't care what it was about because it was just the easiest way to get this assignment done. My
Okay.
teacher thought I was a little bit too clever for her, and she decided to talk to my parents about this. And she spoke to my mom and she said, I think your daughter is not doing the assignment incorrectly, but she's not giving it her best effort. And I was worried that my mom, I was going to get in trouble for this.
Of
Um,
course, right?
but I didn't. My mom actually said that she was proud of me because it was a stupid assignment and I had found a shortcut through it. And I think that the lesson I learned is that putting in the maximum amount of effort is not always the best solution. And if there's something that doesn't
Interesting.
need that amount of work, if there is a faster path through it, that can actually be the best path and the fastest way to get something done.
Interesting. So, is that why Deep Fission plans to put their reactors a mile below? Because that's the fastest way. You can cut out all these construction costs that nobody else on the surface of the earth can. Because I mean, you just have to, right? The millions of metric tons of concrete that you need, you're going to need a fraction of that in the borehole, right? So is that how it's impacted your founding of Deep Fission and your beginning with deep isolation? Is that a correct assumption?
I think you get to the heart of the problem and you don't have to deal with all of the stuff that everybody else necessarily thinks is the issue. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
I really love that story that you told. It was told so succinctly, and it's really interesting that you throw in the dynamic of, when you get home, you thought you were going to be in trouble
Yeah.
with your parents, right? But your mother really saw it as a way that Liz is thinking about what is the best way to the best outcome,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Versus Liz just reading the whole paper, researching everything, created a matrix to see which one is the best article. And then she gets stressed over it. And then she goes to her teacher and says, "This is what I've produced," versus saying, "Hey, this is a good article. It meets the requirements. It's good. And here it is, teacher." So I really like that. Well, thank you so much for the time today, Liz. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited about Deep Fission and what you're going to do with the company. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Maurice. It's been my pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Liz. You can find the Energy Room podcast on Spotify and on YouTube. Please subscribe, listen, and become more informed about the critical energy systems which power our lives.
The Energy Room.